Okay. And then I think we're ready to hand over to Stephen Fawkes, who is going to give us a little bit of background for what happened in the first one. So here we got the housekeeping again, and you've seen my point about please keep it all professional. Thank you, Helen. So Stephen, over to you.
Thank you. So those are who we are. I'm one of the trustees of ALL as well, and I'm a big fan of the chat. So please do put the comments in the chat. And my little bit of introduction now is about what happened in the chat last time round. So there on the screen, you can see how this is going to be working. We're going to be looking at some questions and asking you for some comments. That's after I've summarized a bit of what went on last time. And then David and Helen have organized some polls, which are a quick way of collecting views from all of you at the same time. Those will be anonymous, so you can feel free to respond as you want, but use the chat if you have questions or comments that you would like people to look at in another sort of context. So that was my job last time round, really, looking at the chat. We will have a pause so that we can think about individual things that are popping up in that chat as we go along. And then afterwards, I should be doing a similar job to what I did last time round, going through that chat and plucking out quotations which are interesting or which will inform our judgment about how to respond on behalf of the whole association. So today's event is about your chance to express your opinions. We'll talk about that obviously in some depth and feel that you are part of the family of ALL expressing your views as well. So these are the two consultations. They both have the same deadline, Wednesday the 19th. The GCSE subject content review is being run by DfE and the revised qualifications by Ofqual. Ian Borkham, who was involved as the chair of the panel when they were making the recommendations, is now the chair of Ofqual, and so he stepped down from any further involvement in this consultation. So here we go. So the last time we met, we had about 200 people in the Zoom room. So you can imagine that the comments that were coming in, the questions and the opinions were very varied, very wide-ranging, and very uncontrolled. So I must say, next time, please try and keep all of your responses in the right order so I can just copy them and paste them. What it meant was I had to read through all of them and then identify headings and then try and group them under the headings. So the way you see them now, if you look at the chat, which is on the ALL London website, the link that you can see on there, if you want to look at the whole of the chat from last time, or indeed you want to watch the recording, you'll find everything there. That's organized into fairly impromptu headings that occurred to me that the things seemed to go under as I was reading through all the views. So I'm going to show you now what the headings were. They're not in any order. This is just how they came out on the page. None of these will be surprises to you, especially if you were there last time, obviously. So there are overviews, that's people just expressing general views about what they think about the contents of the consultation proposals. There was quite a lot of discussion about culture and the aspects of culture that people were particularly concerned about in the GCSE process. That was linked in part to motivation, but that came out in other ways as well. Some of the people who were there were concerned about the progression from GCSE onwards and whether the new proposals would be supportive of that progression and so on. There were obviously many comments about the examinations proposals themselves and some about tiering. And we know that tiering is an issue that people have specific ideas and thoughts about from their own contexts and from their own points of view. So that's a very tough one to take a view on. Speaking obviously came up quite a lot, speaking in the form of the lack of interaction or the presence of interaction that we would require in our exams, and the specific proposals that are put into the document for us to respond to. Assessment and curriculum, that led to a discussion about pedagogy and how much the proposals were tending to suggest a particular sort of pedagogy. A big question early on in the meeting was about contexts, how can you situate your language if you don't have context? How do the word lists help you to do that? Followed on by another discussion about where the words were coming from, about where the corpora were, who those corpora of language, high frequency language was coming from, what sort of people, was that the same as the people who we're trying to teach to their GCSE. The questions about protected characteristics are always going to be there, and there is some opportunity to respond to those in one of the consultation documents. The timing, as it was already mentioned on the slide previously, the timing of this consultation at the same time as people in secondary schools are dealing with all of the problems of the GCSE this year and the examination, or the non-examination system we're running there. So that's why Renee is encouraging you to take part in the consultation yourself and with your colleagues if you have time, because we know a lot of people may not get round to that because they're so busy with other things. And of course, the issues in school will include things like the management of resources and the concern that if we have changes in GCSE, the resources that people bought just 2 or 3 years ago will then be wasted. So the consultation, as you know, comes within a larger context. So we do know that there's a concern in the government, in the Department for Education, especially about the EBAC and about the place of languages within the EBAC. So that's definitely one of the questions that has brought along the consultation recommendations that we're being shown at the moment. So I think I've got 10 quotations from the first time round. The first one here was someone who tried to ask every question they had in their head in one sentence. So it's about culture, it's about a Western-centered list of language, and it's about the lack of context. That sums up a great deal of the dialogue from last time round. The second one focuses on the authentic resources, which is another issue that some GCSE teachers were regretting. There was no sign of that within the proposal specifically. And the next one was looking at the motivation of students and about what teacher voice and pupil voice was saying, and whether the particular focus on phonics and grammar were the things that were going to motivate our younger and slightly older students too. And then again, going into the protected characteristics, dyslexic students, are they being treated fairly with the range of test activities that were mentioned in the paper? There's the question about the context that came through very strongly in several different quotations. And then a request for samples of what this thing might actually look like. This is an issue that we know the exam boards themselves are quite concerned about, and they're having their own meetings to try and find out how these things would work and what they could do to try and resolve that issue, should it be something that goes through, obviously. And then there's the question again about whether the corpora are corpora of words used by adults or whether they're used by the young people who we are teaching. And the last screen of quotations, there's the question about progression from GCSE to A-level. Will this ease that progression or not? The next one, the big question there, is the one about costs in schools, about status in schools, about timing in schools, and about demoralization of teachers, all of those things of major importance to us as an association, of course. And the last one, putting the finger on the political question, is this actually intended, or would it result in an improved uptake of the EBAC in our student cohort? So if after tonight you want to do a bit more reading, I know how desperate you are to find more things to do because you are having such a quiet life at the moment. You'll find in the article on the top link there, that's a combined article which links to the Languages Today article that came out in January about the debate on content. And it links to, and that article links to the Oxford University Research, I forget what the A stands for, archive, their research, which was about what teachers wanted to see in Key Stage 4 back in last year. And they have now got a new research project out. If you can be I was going to say bothered. That's not really the adjective I wanted to use. If you are interested to fill in their questionnaire, I've just put that link into the chat for you to go and look at that one too. You also have a link there to the NALA research, which was particularly about social inequality, and to our briefing number 29, which tells you the background to the consultations themselves and where the forms and everything are. There are other things going on at the moment, lots of things going on in different organizations. And we just have a couple mentioned there, an interview with Professor Milton, whose work on high frequency language has had some influence on some of the work that's going on at the moment. And then an AQA panel discussion on the 27th for invited guests. So there are 2 consultations, remember, you can answer both of them, you can answer one of them. The thing to be prepared for is that the questions are written in such a way, not always to allow you to respond to the thing you really want to talk about. So don't be surprised if you're frustrated by the questions. They tend to be leading questions like, do you agree? Or do you approve? Those are the sorts of questions you're going to get. And one thing to think about when you're replying is to try and make sure you answer the question you're being asked. We say this to our pupils as well, so I might as well say it to you. So if you want to write a long thing about speaking, don't write it in the question about culture, because they might not read it. They'll say that's not relevant to that question. Likewise, if you've got a concern, then you need to avoid what British people nearly always do. When you ask a British person, do you agree? They normally say yes, but I also think, and then they tell you that they actually disagree completely. Don't say yes, because if you say yes, the people who can read the form won't go any further. They'll just put a tick in the yes box. So be bold and say no, and then explain why it is that you want to say no. And that is the end of my little introduction from last time. So I'm now handing you back to the present in the form of Helen and David.
Hello. My job now is just to explain how we're going to go about the next bit. What we've done is we've put together some questions which are based on the comments which Stephen drew out. So they're not necessarily the questions of the consultation, you've got access to those. This is really for us to see to what extent people agree or disagree with some of the points which were raised at the last webinar. So what we've done is that we've put together the questions which relate to what people said. We've grouped them so that they more or less follow the order in which the DfE asks the questions. And our aim is, what we're going to do is show you the set of forthcoming questions before polling. So there are actually, I think, 11 sets of questions which we'll show you, just explain what the purpose of them is, and then we'll launch the poll. So we're hoping that they're questions which allow you to address the issues that you want to address, and this will then inform ALL's response. But as I said, they're grouped and sequenced according to the DfE questions related to the same point and issue. And also, as we've all been stressing, the chat is there for you to be able to add anything extra that you want to.
And although they are phrased in the way, do you agree, that was just more so that sort of in line with the way that DfE have put things. And as we go through the questions, we'll draw attention where some of them might have a negative part to the question. So we'll make sure that people are clear as to what the question is asking for. It's not implying that that's a particular view of ALL, because the key thing tonight is to pick up from webinar 1, clarify those points, and then that will inform the ALL response.
Okay.
So the way that we're going to do this is that I'm going to introduce each set of questions, and then Helen is going to take over and actually run the polling in her capacity as a Zoom wizard. So we're beginning with the questions 10 to 14, which is the initial key parts of the DfE questionnaire. The first ones are just the factual bits about each person. And you'll see that the questions there are actually starting from the presumption of the proposal of the 90% from the top 2,000 words and just go on from there. And what we wanted to do was just to step back a little bit and start to unpick things. Because in the webinar 1, etc., there was a sense perhaps that there was merit in a defined word list, but perhaps more disagreement as to how that defined word list should come together. So we really wanted to unpick that rather than just jump straight into the DfE questions. So you're about to get 4 separate questions as to whether you think there should be a defined word list in principle for each of the 4 skills: reading, writing, listening, speaking, and classifying those also as receptive and productive. So I'm going to pass over to Helen now to conduct the first poll. Fingers crossed, we have tested this, but as always, there's a degree of anxiety as to how it will actually work in practice. So over to the Zoom wizard.
Thank you. So no pressure here. Let's see whether this works. As I say, we have tried this out. So I've got the polling here. I'm going to relaunch polling, continue. So can you confirm that you can see the poll, and you can scroll down it? So there, as David has said, you've got the separate questions there for, do you agree there should be a defined word list for listening? One for reading. People are already answering speaking and writing. And we're going to do a, how should we end it then?
Well,
we say we do a countdown.
We can watch the number of people replying. We know that there are about 90 participants. So once it gets to, well, 87 on the clicking on the word list. So,
oh, it says at the top, 35 have voted.
Once it gets to a reasonable number, Helen will then just do a 5-second countdown just to make sure that people have clicked and moved on. But things are going through at a pretty rapid rate, and there are differences between the skills, which
I'm really sorry about this. I'm just, it is a little bit like one of these polling nights, isn't it? I'm feeling you ought to.
Yeah, I'm not going to do a swingometer on these, don't worry. So it started to slow down. So if you give it 5 seconds.
And obviously you don't have to vote at all, because I realise that I haven't put a don't know there. They're all going to be yes or no. So right, should we say that's all? Some more have voted. More. I mean, we have got time for this because it's just 11 sets, isn't it? And this is the purpose of the evening, I suppose. So.
And so do any written comments, do put them into the chat, because Stephen will then be able to collate those. It's paused on 69 for a bit, so I think should we just do 5 seconds?
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I do end polling, and then I can share the results. Is that what you do then? Yeah. So if I click on this, and then you should see the results there. So
Renee or Jane, do you want to comment on this at all, or should we just go on to the next?
I think it's interesting just to kind of draw your attention. There was a kind of question in the chat whether it makes a difference actually in terms of making a choice whether or not you have seen the vocabulary lists, and I think at this point it's not about the specific lists as far as I understand the polling. It's more kind of if there's a defined list, and not which list yet.
That's right.
That's the kind of focus at the moment. But we come back to that specific list.
Yeah, that's right. It was very much just an in principle, and that's even there. We can just see that there is a variation which is of interest. So. And we'll come on to the word list in a moment. So
yes, we are going to come on to the nature bit. So shall I stop share results?
Yeah.
And that is stored. So we have got that. Phew, that worked. Right.
So for the next set of questions, please can you assume that there are going to be defined word lists? And what we want to explore is the relative size of those word lists. We're not going into the absolute size of the word list. We just want to get a sense from people as to whether they feel that the word lists for some skills should be larger or different from the other skills. We've phrased it in terms of larger so that we can then get a hierarchy of the different skills. So you can see that the questions that you're going to be asked are on the screen. So the very first one.
Ellen, we can still see the poll on top of the questions.
No, I haven't done that yet.
We haven't done that yet. Sorry.
I can still.
So, sorry, if you still can see the poll, you need to close it yourself.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
thank
see,
you.
sorry. Oh, by me stopping sharing, then it didn't remove it from everybody's screen. I didn't realise that. Okay,
Right.
sorry.
Okay, lovely. So the very first question is to ask, should they be the same size for all skills? And then it leads into 3 separate questions with a different focus for the different types of skills. So I'll pass over to Helen to actually conduct the poll itself. So this is, if there are defined word lists, the relative size of those word lists for each of the skills.
Okay, so I launch that. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So just assume you tell me if you can't see it.
Oh, why is it? Yes, no.
Oh, have I not got yes, no? I think, no, you know, it's a multi. I've made a mistake on this, everybody. I think I'm going to have to redo that one.
Oh,
Well,
you've
no,
done
I think people
multi-choice.
will, yeah, I think people will naturally only do one or the other, won't they? I might have to, I'll redo that one for the end.
Okay, so it's now become a multi-choice one. So could you choose your preference out of those 4 possibilities? I mean, clearly, if you believe they should be the same size for all skills, you can just do, you can pick the first one. If you believe it's the reading in particular that should be larger, choose the 4th one.
I think I did do that on purpose because it was, you can only do one of those, can't you? If you do one of those, it negates the others. So I think I did think about this.
I think what you hadn't do was just choose one, but that's pretty obvious, I would think.
So we've got 55 people have voted so far. It's up to 60. I think we had 69, 70 last time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I think, Vincent, you're saying it depends if it's prescriptive, and we are
Yeah.
saying yes if it is
Yeah.
prescriptive.
yeah, all of this is on the assumption that it's a prescriptive defined word list. What we haven't got onto, and we will come onto, is how that list is to be defined. We're trying to do this as a sort of succession of, in principle, questions to try and unpick it. Oh, the reason I'm not seeing.
So you're saying you're not seeing the
No,
option?
it's a multi-choice one on this one. So hopefully you just pick 1 out of 4 rather than yes, no. So there's a bit of failure of coordination between the 2 presenters here. On the PowerPoint doesn't quite match the question, so apologies for that. But hopefully, if you just you should have just 4 things you can pick from.
And you're saying you can't see anything. Is there just one person who can't see anything? It looks.
We've got 64 replies, so
Okay.
let's
So
just
shall
give
I?
a 5-second countdown.
5, 4. This is like school. 3, 2,
Stop knocking.
1. Okay, so end polling, and then share results.
Renee, Jane, would you like to comment? Or?
Yeah, just I think what's I think obvious is, and we can, the result of the polling kind of reflect also the discussions, the kind of variety of thoughts on this topic, I think, and that's quite interesting. And in the chat, it's worth just highlighting also that there is quite a bit of discussion about interference and actually how and the importance of that as part of language learning. So that's just something to kind of reflect as part of the discussion as well.
Okay, stop showing results, and then you close your poll so you can see the screen. Okay.
Right, so now we're going to move on to the section around how do the word lists come together. But that actually is inexorably interwoven with the themes and context question. So we're actually going to look at the themes context questions and then come back to the issue around how the word lists are put together, because there's some issues of principle here that we need to try and address in the right order. So we will come back to word lists, but we need to address themes and topics first.
Okay.
So those are the two questions that are in the DfE consultation. So firstly around not including themes and informed instead by vocabulary. And so what we'd like to know from you, slightly looked at this from a different basis, but so the first question is really, should the students know for exams the range of context, themes, topic from which they're going to be tested? And then if not, if they don't know, is it possible for the question to be valid and reliable across students from different schools? And by valid and reliable, we mean that the tests are actually testing what they set out to do, and reliable means that there's a consistency in the answers. And then sort of linked with that was that if there are going to be that, should there be an agreement between exam boards for a common set of themes so as to promote collaboration, comparison of standards, transferability of textbooks, etc.
And can I just say that it's particularly saying about whether there's a requirement to have themes, because my understanding from it is that the expectation is that they may well put together themes, but there isn't a requirement that there should be specific themes.
And then that they should be the same ones between exam boards. So it's trying to ensure from the outset that things are set up properly, rather than it may or may not happen once we get into it, when of course it's too late because things have been set into going. So let's launch the polling.
Whilst the polling is on, can I just make a point? There's a question, there's a recognition in the chat that obviously the consultation, the DfE consultation is quite narrow in terms of its focus, and quite limited space in terms of responses. Can we, wherever there's a response box, do put your comments in, but in terms of the associations and any other organizations, we are able to also respond in more detail through open letters and open responses. So we will be doing that as association.
Okay, so we've got about 43 people have voted so far.
I think it'll speed up now because there's quite a lot to read on. The questions are quite long on this one.
Yes, I was worried for a moment because nobody did, but at least it was a good sign, because you actually want to know that people are reading the questions before they answer.
Yeah,
and
they obviously were on this one, David. So
yeah,
good.
Yes, no, I'm sorry about that.
I told them there to read the questions carefully, and they well behaved.
Yes, they
You
are.
sound like a teacher, Steve.
He is, he is. He is our institution. He is.
That's good. We're getting up
Our
towards,
treasure.
we've got 66 now, so we're starting to
Towards the countdown.
slow down.
So my pen ran out. Julia's not used to using a pen. Everything's on the computer for Julia.
Okay, I think we're
Okay,
probably slowing
so
down to
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, end polling and share results.
Renee, do you want to comment, or?
I'll wait for you always tell me to tell me to stop sharing results, Renee.
Okay, sorry. I was just in looking at the chat. Sorry.
There's a lot more agreement on this poll, isn't there? About, you know, it's not so evenly split. There's yes, no, yes, effectively to the 3 questions have got the largest responses, but there's still, you know, sizable number of people who have worries about it.
Fine. And in a sense, that was what we were wanting to establish from people as to what they felt on that, because I think as somebody's popped into the chat, that then has implications for where do the 1200, 1700 words come from. Now, I think from that, there's a clear sense that people do want to have themes. And so then that becomes an issue as far as where do the 1200, 1700 words come from. So I think we can probably stop sharing the results for this, and then we can go back to the questions on the word lists. So it's saying if there are going to be defined word lists, how should that word list be defined or compiled? And so there are going to be 2 slides we're showing you, which will come into a single poll. So I think, as we saw back in webinar 1, there were many concerns expressed around this idea of very tightly controlled highest frequency from general corpora. So what we're just really wanting to see confirmation is, in that case, should alternative ways of defining the word list be considered? And if we go on to that, and then what we want to know from people is if we should be looking into alternatives. We're giving 3 possibilities, and I'm hoping that you can actually answer yes or no to each of them, but we will see what the web wizard has actually.
It's multi-choice.
She said it's multi-choice.
Didn't you want it as multi-choice? I've put which of the following approaches should be considered, because people could say, well, I'm happy for that to be considered. And that
can you do 2 in the multi-choice?
Yes.
Oh, right. So can we really stress to people, if you like 2 of them, you can click 2 boxes, or 3 actually. So, so do you want to start? Look, we're going to launch the polling.
Tell Dave is a little nervous whether or not this is going to work, but it worked last time that people could do more than 1.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a deliberate. Sorry, I didn't change the PowerPoint.
They're all going to be good at multitasking.
Yeah, and people are able to vote for more than 1 because the number of answers for 2 is adding up to more than the number of answers for question 1. So
it's good having a maths teacher on board here.
So we've got 43 people who voted so far.
We found something Greg agrees with.
And just answer the question, everybody can submit for all of them.
So we've got up to 65. Can I do a 5-second countdown?
Right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Polling, show results.
I think in terms of as it's obvious from when we look at the results here, in terms of the first question, there's obviously very strong agreement with alternative ways should be explored. When it comes to alternative ways, there's less agreement there, and that again reflects very much discussions that we have been seeing in the last few weeks amongst ourselves, but also in terms of social media exchanges, etc. And I think worth also highlighting is from the chat definitely discussion around themes. Is there different perspectives on themes, but also very much a question around choice. If there's choice for themes, how easy would it be to kind of transfer from one school to another? If schools were kind of teaching different themes, if a student wanted to transfer, there was also Jane, was there anything else that you have picked up?
No, I think you've covered it there. There's quite a lot of chat conversation about the frequency of themes, but it's going to be very useful.
I think, can I just be honest? I think that there's a problem on the polling here, because apparently you had to choose something from 2, even if you press no. So those people who pressed no had to choose one of the others. So I think
But
that's something to look at again.
It's only 4% who said no. So
But more people might have said no and just didn't want to choose the next one. So didn't put in anything.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that.
Yes, I think it's fair
Okay,
to
we
highlight
should
that.
check.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Should we go on to the next
Yeah.
slide?
Can I stop?
Oh, sorry.
Apologies for that. On to the next.
Fine. So here we're looking at the question types, and we'll be unpicking those in the next few sets of questions. But that's just to give you the totality of question 17 to 22. So let's start around the language that the questions are phrased in, and this was something that was well received in webinar 1, that by having the questions and the rubric in English, it avoided that double testing penalty of people not understanding the question, therefore they couldn't give an answer. But again, we just wanted to confirm people's feelings around that. So if we can launch the polling on that. We're up to 60, 84.
See, it's about 70% of people are participating. So. Okay.
We'll do a quick countdown.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Share. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to add to this.
Okay.
You cut one there.
Fine. Now, the next set of questions are actually looking at the role of the DfE, and just going back to webinar 1, you'll recall that we had 2 or 3 slides how the way that it should operate is that the DfE should specify the subject content, and then Ofqual, which is the independent body, should be then looking at the assessment methods that are required. And there's a question around whether DfE should be specifying pedagogy in the context, because Stephen's highlighted around Ofsted not specifying a pedagogy, and perhaps that tradition in this country that the DfE don't specify the pedagogy. But again, we wanted to get members' views around the roles that have actually happened in practice, given the subject content, but whether to some extent DfE have overstepped their remit. So the first one was around pedagogy. The second was that they were actually specifying the details of the assessment. And I saw there's some comments in the chat originally around how that related to a sort of a test versus GCSE. And then the final one is this issue around mixed skills testing. By and large, the current ones, each skill is tested separately, whereas again, the DfE, by specifying the details of the assessment, are actually saying that there shall be mixed skills testing. You're testing at least 2, if not 3 skills in one particular type of question. And again, whether people are comfortable with that mix. So I think, is that one single poll 6? Yes, that's fine. So we'll launch the poll now, but again, take time just to reflect on, because this is a more subtle one around whether they should be doing it, almost whether or not you necessarily agree with what they've ended up with. So whilst they're taking some chat, we can do notions.
Yeah. Okay.
Or you add a fourth option not applicable to the second question. Actually, that would be a better way.
Okay.
Then you could.
Sorry, you're hearing us talking. We just think we'll redo that poll where I made a mistake.
Yeah, we need a fourth option of not applicable would allow people to completely fill it in, not starting from here twice.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we're up to 63, 65.
Yes. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and end polling.
Yeah.
No results.
I think there's no surprise in my mind to question 1 in terms of pedagogy, but I think I find the response to 2 and 3 really interesting and worth unpacking in more detail as we move forward before we submit a kind of response, because I think that shows that there's definitely a shift in understanding and in terms of remit of the DfE, and I think that's quite an interesting element.
Okay.
Fine. And this perhaps begins to take forward what Renee just said, is because the DfE specified mixed skill testing, then Ofqual have had to follow on from that. And therefore, rather than having the separate assessment objectives of the 4 skills, they've had to go for these mixed skill assessment objectives. So we're just asking the general question as to whether you agree with those assessment objectives rather than the single skill, which is the way that it is at the moment. And again, probably, as Rennie said, some of this is quite complex. So please use the chat to make any more complex points that you'd like to do. So this is just a single question around whether you agree that there should be these mixed skill ones, as opposed to the previous one was, should the DfE be stepping outside its remit to do it? This is now simply just around are you comfortable with having mixed skill assessment objectives, or the alternative would be to have the single skill assessment objectives as they are currently. So this is just focusing on the assessment objectives rather than the role of the people setting it.
I suppose this links a bit with the one about the double penalty. Oh no, that was to do the target language.
It's linked in that sense of, is it to be taken as a totality in terms of the combination of skills, or are you trying to unpick the separate skills?
Even. Gosh.
Okay.
Up to 54, 55. There's still a few more, still another 10 people probably to can just move it away from the chat. So we'll need to chat less actually.
Yes, Jean said it's hard question, double whammy. Yeah. Okay, so we've got the same percentage as others.
Yeah.
Last 5 seconds. People are just still a couple more.
Right.
Can give 5 seconds.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and polling. And shows.
Just while we're closing this one, it's just worth flagging up to you also the debate around themes and context, but also very much the kind of cross-curricular learning is continuing in the chat, and definitely something to reflect very carefully in any association response.
Okay. On to the next one.
Fine. So this was something that came up very much from webinar 1, that by working just off a tightly defined vocabulary list, then it was having a risk of dilution of the awareness of the culture, and similarly by not specifying authentic materials, which actually is in the 2015 culture, it's a risk. It's not saying that teachers wouldn't do it, but in each of these, by not specifying the things, is there a risk in not specifying it? And then it's totally up to teachers whether or not they cover those things. So these are straightforward yes, no questions. We're up to 63, nearly there. Don't do a countdown.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And polling and show results. Okay.
Yeah, but I won't comment just because conscious of time.
Yes. Right. So I'll stop share results.
Okay. So we are nearly getting to the end. So there's a final question from the DfE, question 24. And the first one is going back to that big change that probably for the last 20 years, the emphasis has been on communication of a language and its underlying purpose for learning and using the language. That's the first question. And then separately from that, given comparable outcomes, which means that the grades remain the same from one year to the next, irrespective of the standard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do we believe that these proposals will increase the uptake of modern languages at Key Stage 4? So 2 separate yes, no questions. We're up to 55, so nearly there.
Just 2 more questions after this. Okay.
To the 60s.
Nearly 65. Just give another couple of minutes. No, sorry, not a couple of seconds. Don't do a countdown.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Results. And yes, stop share results.
Just running. Do you want to comment, Rennie, for a moment? Or?
Yeah, I think I'd like to pick up a couple of comments from the chat, if I may. There's definitely a debate emerging around kind of authentic communication and link of that authentic communication also to motivation and exciting, exciting content in a way for learners. But there's also that area emerging around in terms of how will that affect ultimately kind of speaking and the speaking activities, which may come on to as well. So it's just worth raising. There's some kind of points coming out that also affect the motivation of learners, which is worth kind of considering as part of that debate as well. Shane, anything else?
No, I think that you picked them up now. And there's a bit of a debate about culture, which relates to the, well, come back to,
Okay, the grammar one, they don't actually ask any specific questions. It's simply grammar annexes are comprehensive, unambiguous, and easy to understand. So the one thing we just wanted to question around was linked to that was linked to the word list one, as to the should the grammar be exactly the same for the productive and receptive. So do you agree that there should be no receptive only elements, i.e. do you agree that productive and receptive should be the same in the grammar? So thoughts of poll?
To the last one.
Sorry, we're up to 63 now, so in a moment. And then what we'd like to suggest is that if we could pass over to Renee and Jane to do sort of, and Stephen in that matter to join in, whilst Helen quickly adds an option 4 to that question where people needed to be able to say no or not wishing to give one out of the multi-choices. So we'll do that. We should just take about 3 or 4 minutes. I'm aware that it's got to 9 o'clock, but given the importance of that question, hopefully people wouldn't mind staying on for another few minutes just so that we've got a definitive answer to that question. So we've got up to 70 now, so if we just end this polling and then Helen can get on and relaunch the other question. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you. I think a really valid point that is worth highlighting as well is the whole notion of if culture. Would we assess culture, and if we assess culture, what would actually what would it look like? And if I don't mind, I'd like to very briefly just share my experience from culture testing in some of the other countries at that GCSE type level in the assessment, which is quite interesting that in some countries where in English assessment at the age of 12, 13, you still have quite a lot of culture in there, and a lot of culture will be assessed, and it's often assessed as basically have to cover some facts that they have learned in lessons, but it's a different approach to actually assessing culture, which is worth kind of exploring as part of our reflections to these questions as well. Shane, over to you.
Yes. Again, it all depends what you mean by culture, doesn't it, as well, and whether you know, obviously, it's important that students are exposed to the culture of the country that whose languages, or the countries, I should say, whose languages they're studying. And that raises another element, doesn't it, about whose culture we're talking about here. But is it essential that it should be tested? That's another interesting point.
And I think the other point that that has been brought in and from several people is that kind of what impact will it have on Key Stage 2? How do you advise Key Stage 2 learners? So and Key Stage 2 departments. So I think we need to think about this also as part of our kind of engagement with Key Stage 2 colleagues in the debate and the run up to the consultation, but also very importantly after the consultation and when the results are presented, how to kind of involve those proactively in the process.
It's difficult, isn't it, really, to give any advice at the moment because we don't know what will actually be confirmed. But obviously, it's a very important question, and the working back of all these changes right through to Key Stage 2 is as important as you know what's been highlighted in the chat so far is going on to Key Stage 5. What impact does it have? It's picking really on one building block in the whole sequence of language learning, and it has knock-on effects.
But I would add as well that, of course, in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, we are still governed by the national curriculum and the programme of study. Yes.
But again, it's how all this, there needs to be a look, doesn't there? It needs to be borne in mind at least that there are implications. I agree, Stephen. There's a very interesting discussion going on in the chat now, Rinny, isn't there, about the content of languages, that learning, which is one that's been raised before, about how students don't find the themes and topics necessarily all that exciting when you compare with what they do in geography and history. And also there's another one going on about rote learning in GCSE.
Okay, we've reached the hour.
So
just give me 2 minutes and I will launch this one, okay?
No, that's fine.
And the other thing I'd like to say, as I put on the slide there, it's question 24 in the DfE consultation is the general one. And I'm sorry, I've just realised that we haven't gone into the Ofqual questions. Sorry, there are a few more slides which we didn't go into really around the Ofqual ones. And the really important one that I'd like to flag on the Ofqual is the one around the equality impact assessment, because one of the things that came through webinar 1 was that the word list was a very Western centered one, with words like French and Christian in it, but not African and Muslim. So if you have concerns around diversity and inclusion, there isn't actually anywhere in the DfE consultation that you can express it. You can in the Ofqual, and it's a question towards the end under equality impact assessment. But if you have concerns around diversity and inclusivity, then I suggest you answer it in the DfE question 24. So at least it's been expressed in that around that issue as to the breadth of the words to reflect the culture and diversity. Sorry about that. Helen's almost finished.
I have the spelling is all over the place, so I hope you don't mind if I'll just read it aloud, right? Because it's done it. Okay, so I've added that one. Yes, so I've put down, can I check whether everyone is all right? So I've got, if it's essential to retain the principle of word list, which of the following approaches could be considered instead? And I've got the for highest frequency occurrences in one relevant to 16-year-olds from themes specified, 50% from highest list, and then no other approach.
Or just
not applicable.
Not applicable.
Not applicable. Is that all right for everybody?
Yeah. And then
Not
that's an
applicable.
alternative, and that's something to click and then okay. Should we ready to save that and launch it?
Yes. So save.
Right. So
Here we are. It's called a WPUD list. This is. I'm really sorry about the spelling.
Right.
Here it is.
Now. Okay.
So this is a chance for everyone who was stymied by.
There's people who want to say, yeah, if they want to say no, they don't. They really want to keep to the the list that's suggested, you've now got the option of being able to say
Not applicable.
not applicable.
Yeah. Well done, Helen, for typing. Stephen must be sitting there with his red pen, itching to
Well,
start crossing out and so on. So,
well,
anyway,
there was a certain nervousness, plus the fact that I can't see all the letters on my keyboard because
They've run rubbed away.
anyway, the key thing is that we are genuinely giving everyone an opportunity to answer this question. And indeed, some people who wanted to almost do this, not even start from that point in the second question. So
Yeah.
we've got up to 50. So in just a minute, we'll be there. The cats are making a noise at the door because they don't like being excluded. So we'll be able to make them happy in a few minutes as well. But and then we can just flick through the remaining slides. No, I need to go through that in a moment. So as soon as we get that in a moment, we've got up to 54. 56. Anybody else want to vote? And where some people might have left, it's stuck at 56. Should we just do a countdown?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so there are the results given that extra option so that everybody who wished to submit could submit no to the first question.
Okay.
Fine. So can I just finish off with the very last slide, just so that we've made sure that we've covered everything. That was the general comments. Those were the Ofqual ones. This is where you pick up Stephen's question around protected characteristics like dyslexia, etc. Sorry, that's the cost in question, and then really back to Renee to finish things off. Or Jane, Rennie and Jane, sorry.
Okay, do you want to kick off?
Really, there's a question now which David might be able to answer, come up in the chat. And I don't know if there is a question about tiering in the consultation.
It's in the Ofqual consultation. Sorry, let me just go back.
You had to go through this rather quickly.
Sorry. Yes, it's questions 3 and 4 in the Ofqual consultation, but it's not in the DfE because tiering is an assessment decision that Ofqual can do. But there are questions in there.
So if you, just say that to people in the webinar, if you do want to comment on that, it's in the Ofqual rather than in the DfE one that you need to. Yeah. Well, I think really we've got a fantastic amount of information from this, and thank you very much, Helen and David, for all the work that's gone into doing the polling. And also from the chat, which is Stephen, I don't know if they've heeded your instructions to keep it in sequence. You might have a man with chat as well.
Well, because the questions came in a sequence,
it's going to be better than last time, isn't it? Yes. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us and input. And it's been a really interesting experience. I think it's the first time we've done anything like this at ALL. And so we'll be able to evaluate and hopefully improve for another time. Rennie, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, just a couple of points for me. I've posted another link in that I think Emma has posted early on, but just kind of drawing attention to additional resources where some thinking was going on about the consultations, which you may want to engage with before you respond to the. So I think judging from the responses that we've seen today and from the polls, I think I would like to encourage you all to respond, because as we can see, we are not all agreeing on everything, and it's worth kind of that your view is heard. It's really important to submit a response. I think just to clarify, in case people haven't seen it, it is just in MFL that this consultation is taking place, and it is only the content reviews only for German, Spanish and French, so not the other languages at this stage. So once again, thank you very much. Please do watch out for future events, but most importantly, thank you, David and Helen, for pulling this presentation and this polling together, and for being challenged with the technical aspect of the poll as well. So very well done. And once again, many thanks to everyone for giving up this evening and informing also ultimately the Association for Language Learning's response to this consultation. Thank you.
And really, I mean, just coming in from the chat, there's been a question about, is there any student voice in this? Well, students can fill in the consultation. I mean, that's rather a challenge for them, but it is possible. It's not just for language teachers, as you were saying at the beginning. We encourage senior management to have a look at it as well, because it's going to have lots of implications. So please spread the word around in your schools and get people up there signing it, you know, putting in their rules, because we want this to come out with the best result possible for our learners, and the way to do that is for everyone to contribute.
Lovely. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
shall I stop recording now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Stop